To begin with new information on the explosive devices planted by the New Orleans attacker. Officials are telling our John Miller that the attacker, who drove a car through that crowd in the early hours of New Year's Day, murdering 14 people, injuring dozens more, used a rare organic compound not previously seen before in the United States. And officials are trying to determine exactly how the attacker may have obtained it. These are crucial new details. We have more on this coming up here in just a moment, and it comes as we are having more information coming in on the man who blew himself up in a Cybertruck outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. Officials just releasing video of Matthew Livelsberger stopping at a charging station en route to Las Vegas. You can see him there walking towards the vehicle, appears to get inside of it. Now, officials say that his act in front of the Trump Hotel was a suicide. They say Livelsberger was suffering from PTSD and had trouble in his personal life. We know Livelsberger was active duty. He served in the special forces. He'd served in Afghanistan. He was a highly decorated military member. Similarly, the New Year's Eve attacker in New Orleans, Shamsuddin Jabbar, also served in Afghanistan, also decorated for his service. His commander in Afghanistan tweeting today, quote, "I am in utter disbelief. He was a great soldier, someone who showed discipline and dedication. To think that the same individual who once embodied quiet professionalism could harbor so much hate, leading to such unspeakable atrocities, is incomprehensible and heartbreaking." But a newly uncovered audio file uploaded by Jabbar about a year ago offers a look into his religious beliefs. There he says, quote, "Satan's voice is also the misleading of people from Allah's way. They really go hand in hand." And we see what this gradually drives a person to. It's a gentle, gradual luring into the things that God has made forbidden to us. The intoxicants like marijuana, alcohol, sedatives, opioid stimulants, and others. But despite the military and service similarities between the two attackers, officials say that the two incidents are not connected. But still tonight, law enforcement is on high alert as the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI are warning of possible attacks. We've got both stories covered tonight with Natasha Chen on the ground in Las Vegas and Omar Jimenez in New Orleans. And Omar, let's start there with you with this breaking details here that we are learning. What have you found out?
Yeah, so law enforcement officials are telling our John Miller that it was a rare organic compound not previously seen in the United States that was used in the explosive devices that were found in the French Quarter area after the attack that began at the intersection just behind me. And it comes as investigators are also learning more about the actions taken leading up to the time of the attack. Tonight, investigators saying they've determined that 42-year-old Shamsuddin Jabbar set fire to the Airbnb in New Orleans where he was staying ahead of the attack. Authorities say he set a small fire in the hallway and strategically placed accelerants around the house as part of his effort to destroy evidence. All of this as federal authorities are now warning law enforcement across the country to be on the lookout for potential copycat attacks. So you're the council member that represents the French Quarter. How would you assess the ability to prevent something like this before New Year's Day in this area?
Well, seeing how it hadn't happened before, I would assume that enforcement figured that we had it pretty under control. But after the events on New Year's Day, we clearly have weak spots. We clearly have vulnerabilities.
I saw some of those archers on the streets, those yellow ones on the sidewalks now. Why weren't those there before?
That is a question for our law enforcement.
This is where that truck entered Bourbon Street in the early morning hours of the new year. There was a police vehicle here essentially stationed as a makeshift barrier as some of the city's previously installed barriers were under repair. But even if a vehicle took up this entire street, you can see there still was a good amount of space to go around that onto the sidewalk, which, as we know from video, is essentially what happened. Now you see some yellow temporary archer barriers on the sidewalk, but those were not there when this attack unfolded. The city police department has made clear in recent days that barriers previously installed to try and prevent vehicles from coming down the street were under repair ahead of February's Super Bowl in the city, and many of the current measures in place are temporary. But going back years to 2019, a private security firm warned the risk of terrorism, including by vehicular attacks, remained, quote, highly possible, and recommended that vertical safety structures that can move up and down, known as bollards, be fixed and improved immediately. That didn't happen.
It's still a bit bit unclear as to what took so long. We are definitely going to look into this as a council to figure out who had the contracts, if they were tied up where, why was this moving forward.
For some business owners who were open at the time of the attack,
it was traumatic. You know, it wasn't just like a random shooting or something or whatever. This was like, you were seeing it all down the street.
the extra barricades are a welcome sight for him.
It's very nice to see him, and we know we have more to go. I'm happy to see them all, and I'm happy to see, all the police officers.
And there is still a police presence at the entrance to Bourbon Street here. Now, obviously, we have the Super Bowl coming up next month here, and I actually asked that city councilman if he was satisfied with the security assessment or the security efforts that they've seen so far. He says those sidewalk archer barriers are just the start of what he would like to see in the wider safety picture. But of course, as you heard, he did believe there were clearly some vulnerabilities. He does expect them to have more security in the lead up to that big event, Aaron.
Out front now, Leon Panetta, former defense secretary and, of course, also former director of the CIA. Director, I want to just start with you, if I may, we've got a lot of breaking details here, but with what John Miller is reporting on the New Orleans attacker. He is saying that the attacker used a rare compound, an organic one, that until now had never been seen as used in the United States, and that officials at this point are still trying to determine how the attacker may have obtained it. We don't yet have details on exactly what it is, what made it so rare. So I understand there's crucial pieces of this missing, but we do know rare organic compound never before seen used in the U.S. What does that even say to you?
Well, it goes back to the fundamental finding here, which is that he was essentially a lone wolf terrorist who was inspired by ISIS. And what that means is that in many ways, even though there may have been nobody to connect with them directly, that being inspired by ISIS and following ISIS, and if ISIS was aware that there was this lone wolf that was operating in this country, I think there has to be a very careful investigation as to how a compound that resulted in or that could have resulted in additional explosions, how that found its way into his hands. I think it is something we've got to pay attention to, because I think this is a dangerous moment if we're facing other lone wolf terrorists in this country.
Incredibly dangerous. And, you talk about ISIS. Certainly he was inspired by ISIS at the least. But what I find interesting, Director, is that ISIS has not yet claimed responsibility for the attack, which in some cases, when these horrific things happen, even if it's simply inspired by ISIS and not directed by or known by them in advance, they still celebrate it, they take credit for it, they acknowledge it. They have not done so in this case. Why do you think that could be?
Well, I don't read a lot into that, because I suspect that ISIS understands that they were the principal inspiration to this terrorist. And if that's true, and if there are others like this individual who are being inspired by ISIS, they're not going to step out there and claim a lot of credit at this point in time. So I don't think we can read a lot into ISIS not claiming credit. But the fact is they were there. Look, in the intelligence business, I have to tell you, the one thing we worried about the most were lone wolves. How do you track them down? How do you try to protect against this kind of random terrorist act? It is very tough to do. And that's why when it happens, it's got to raise a lot of concern about whether or not intelligence and law enforcement are paying enough attention to the potential for other lone wolves.
I remember this conversation, having it with you so many years ago, when you said this was your single biggest concern. Director, are you concerned that you have two individuals, and obviously they are not related as far as we understand them in any way, but decorated military, one active duty? How much does that worry you?
Well, obviously, as a former Secretary of Defense, I don't like the idea that former soldiers who served well at least during the time they spent in the military, that somehow there was something that happened that then turned them into terrorists. What that was, we don't know. Look, I don't think there's a direct connection here between military experience and suddenly becoming a terrorist, but I do think that what it means is we have to pay attention to people who have served, who have been in action, pay attention as to whether or not they are potential targets for ISIS to try to inspire them to conduct these kinds of attacks.